I have spent 20 years on the front lines of history, from the dusty insurgencies of the Middle East to the frozen trenches of Eastern Europe. But what I am witnessing in Ukraine right now is unlike anything I have ever reported on. It is a surreal evolution of warfare, where the most advanced satellite technology is being strapped to the most ancient modes of transport, and where soldiers are sent into battle dressed in experimental penguin suits just to see if they can survive long enough to be useful. We see the major movements on the maps, the shifting red and blue lines, but the real story of this war is hidden in the details. It is a war of temperature, of tactical silence, and of a desperate, low-tech ingenuity that the mainstream headlines often miss. The first thing you have to understand about the current situation is the sheer brutality of the environment. As we move deeper into the winter of 2026, a red warning has been issued across the front. Temperatures are forecast to plummet to a bone-shattering -30 degrees Celsius. For a soldier in the exposed Donbass steppes, this is not just an inconvenience. We are seeing a wind so piercing it is described as blowing through every layer of clothing. In these conditions, the tactical objective shifts from territory to simple biological survival. Russian forces are increasingly desperate to crawl into cellars of bombed-out ruins, because staying in an open field is no longer just a tactical risk. It is an immediate death sentence from frostbite. The pace of the war is slowing down not because the will to fight has vanished, but because the human body has reached its absolute limit. But even in this deep freeze, the innovation, if you can call it that, continues. One of the strangest sights on the battlefield recently has been the appearance of what Ukrainian drone operators call the penguins. These are Russian soldiers equipped with experimental snow camouflage outfits dubbed the penguin suit. In theory, these bulky, loose-fitting white shells are designed to disrupt the human silhouette and reduce visual detection against the vast, snow-covered open landscapes. In practice, however, they have been a disaster. Ukrainian units have released footage showing these combat penguins moving across the steppe, where their distinctive shape and cumbersome movement actually make them easier to spot from a distance. Instead of blending in, they stand out like silhouettes against the white horizon. Ukrainian personnel have noted that these suits appear to be tested directly on the battlefield, with the soldiers themselves serving as live test subjects for equipment that often restricts their mobility and makes them sitting ducks for FPV drones. Perhaps even more startling is the literal return of the cavalry to 21st century warfare. This is a move born more from desperation and a shortage of armored vehicles than from any tactical nostalgia. Russian Shtorm special forces units are now being formally trained in horseback riding for assault operations. The logic is cold and pragmatic. A horse's natural instincts make it less likely to step on a magnetic mine if it is not wearing metal shoes. Horses can navigate in total darkness and move through off-road terrain, where wheeled vehicles would quickly become mired in mud or be destroyed by anti-tank mines. The most bizarre manifestation of this trend is the horse-mounted Starlink terminal. We have seen video footage of Russian soldiers welding metal rods to saddles to carry satellite dishes into dead zones. Imagine a 19th century animal, trained to withstand the deafening roar of explosions, carrying the hardware for 21st century satellite internet, so that a command post miles away can stream real-time reconnaissance footage. These horses are often used in two-man teams, one to steer and one to provide fire cover, allowing small groups to infiltrate the gray zone in total silence. But the fate of these animals is tragic. The skies are filled with Ukrainian drones that can spot a horse's massive thermal signature from kilometers away. While it is better for the Russian command to kill a donkey than two people in a car, the result is a landscape increasingly littered with the remains of pack animals that never stood a chance against high-tech surveillance. This reliance on animals is a direct result of the staggering attrition rates we are recording. In 2025 alone, the Russian army lost an average of 1,145 soldiers per day, with total irreversible and sanitary losses exceeding 418,000 men, roughly the equivalent of 35 whole divisions. The equipment losses are equally catastrophic, with a record 40,000 units of automotive equipment destroyed in a single year, more than in the first 3 years of the war combined. This massive destruction of transport is what is forcing the transition back to horses, e-scooters, and even electric unicycles. But the cost of this war is no longer confined to the front lines. It is fundamentally reshaping the Russian domestic economy. As of January 1, 2026, the Russian government increased the value-added tax from 20% to 22% to help fund a military budget that now consumes over 38% of total government expenditure. Military salaries alone reached $50 billion in 2025, over 10% of total government spending. While the Kremlin boasts of economic growth, the reality for the average citizen is rising prices for almost all essential goods and services. Oil and gas revenues fell by 24% last year, and the fiscal deficit has exceeded $72 billion, 5 times the original forecast. The price of war is becoming an inescapable reality for the wider Russian population. There is a persistent question that keeps coming up in our reporting. Why, after years of precision missile strikes, do the major bridges in Kyiv still stand? To the armchair generals on the internet, this is a mystery, but the reality is a mix of tactical complexity and quiet diplomacy. Targeting a massive bridge requires high precision, heavy yield strikes that are difficult to execute against a city protected by some of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. However, there are also whispers of a preliminary agreement or a limited pact mediated by the United States to halt strikes on energy infrastructure. While President Zelensky has stated there is no official ceasefire agreement, there are reports that an initiative proposed by the United States envisages a mutual cessation of attacks on power grids and civilian infrastructure. If Moscow stops hitting the lights in Kyiv, Ukraine would theoretically refrain from striking Russian oil refineries and energy hubs. This fragile understanding, born from the need to protect civilian life during the brutal winter, might be the only reason certain critical targets remain untouched for now. As a journalist, you start to see the ghosts of history repeating themselves. Every year on January 29th, Ukraine observes the Remembrance Day of the Heroes of Krutu. It is a story from 1918, where a small, numerically inferior force of 500 Ukrainian soldiers, mostly students and military cadets, stood against a massive Bolshevik offensive at a railway station northeast of Kyiv. They fought for 5 hours, suffering huge losses to delay the enemy advance, allowing the Ukrainian government to win vital time during peace negotiations. When you see the youth of today on the front lines, wearing their experimental penguin suits or tending to their Starlink, carrying horses, you realize that the moral symbol of sacrifice remains the same. They are the Spartans, as some call them, fighting the same battle their great-grandparents fought over a century ago against a foreign army intent on subjugation. The war in Ukraine is not just a conflict of the present, it is a continuation of a long, historic struggle for the future of a motherland. Ultimately, the war is not just about the macro-level headlines we see every day. It is defined by these small, surreal details: the minus 30 degrees Celsius wind, the experimental camouflage, and the ancient bond between a soldier and his horse. These are the stories that tell the true cost of this dead end, or deadlock, and they are the ones we must continue to tell if we are to truly understand what is happening behind the front lines. Stay informed, and stay skeptical of the simple answers. History is being written in the snow, one cold day at a time.